closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Yes, I'm back from Mar-a-Lago to GB News. We'll talk about the Trump result and we'll talk about the impacts of that on relationships with the United Kingdom. I'll also talk about the new remarkable coalition that was put together here that won, a coalition not just of voters, but also a new leadership team. That'll lead on to the Chagos Islands, which I think could become a row between the Americans and us. But also, what about the Chagosians? Has anybody asked them whether they want the islands to go to Mauritius? And we'll also finish up talking about net zero pushing bills up to possibly unaffordable levels at peak times. All of that comes after the news with Sophia Hill.
A very good evening. It's just gone 7 o'clock. I'm Sophia Hill with your latest headlines in the GB newsroom. Our top story this evening, President Joe Biden has told Americans to accept the choice Americans made and bring down the temperature following Vice President Kamala Harris's defeat to Donald Trump in the US election. Speaking at the White House, the president says the US electoral system is fair and can be trusted. With just 74 days until President-elect Donald Trump enters the White House, Biden reminded Americans of their responsibility to make the next weeks count.
For over 200 years, America has carried on the greatest experiment in self-government in the history of the world. And that's not hyperbole, that's a fact. We're the people. The people vote and choose their own leaders, and they do it peacefully. And we're in a democracy. The will of the people always prevails. Yesterday, I spoke with President-elect Trump to congratulate him on his victory. And I assured him that I'd direct my entire administration to work with his team to ensure a peaceful and orderly transition.
Back in the UK, the interest rate's been cut by 0.25%, only the second reduction in almost 4 years, bringing interest rates down from 5% to 4.75%. Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey says we need to make sure inflation stays close to target, so we can't cut interest rates too quickly or by too much. Chancellor Rachel Reeves says with interest rates on a downward path, the Labour government is a world away from the last Parliament. Sir Keir Starmer has signed a deal with Balkan nations today in Hungary to target people smuggling gangs at the 5th EU summit. 46 European leaders gathered to discuss issues including economic security and migration concerns. The Prime Minister has been holding bilateral meetings with European leaders today, including President Zelensky. Meanwhile, the summit will also address Donald Trump's win as the bloc now focuses on how to accommodate the country's 47th president. The Prime Minister was once again asked on his view on the special relationship.
I had a very good meeting with President-elect Trump a few weeks ago when we had dinner together in New York, and that was very positive, very constructive, as I think you know. And obviously I had a phone call with him last night, again, very positive, very constructive.
And with 1 month before the reopening of Notre Dame, the iconic French cathedral welcomes 3 new bells. One of the bells was used during the Paris 2024 Olympic Games at the Stade de France and will be installed inside the cathedral along with 2 smaller ones. The cathedral closed for restoration 5 years ago following a devastating fire and will reopen its doors in just a few weeks. Those are your latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Nigel.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. Well, I have to say, over the years, I have had really quite a fun life, done an awful lot of things that were very interesting. Not much really lives up to the last 2 or 3 days. In America, I arrived late on Sunday night, and I went first to a Donald Trump rally that took place in a town called Reading in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania seemed to be the absolutely key state in every way in this election. And I was really surprised and flattered that he noticed I was in the audience.
He was the big winner of the last election in the UK, and he's a very spectacular man, very highly respected, Nigel Farage.
Well, that was very nice of him. But hey, I've been a very loyal friend over the course of the last 9 years. I've never wavered or wobbled in my support of him, even at times when it hasn't necessarily been that easy. I went on the morning of polling day, and I stood outside a polling station in Pennsylvania just talking to voters as they were coming in and out. And the common observation was there are more Trump signs on lawns this time than we saw in 2020 or we saw in 2016. Why is that, I asked? Well, we're not afraid to say we're Donald Trump supporters anymore. That was very interesting. Suddenly, he wasn't quite the devil that perhaps people thought he was or he'd been made out to be. And I was literally in no doubt on the day that he'd win and win big. I went off to the Mar-a-Lago party, a private party, no press allowed in the room at all, apart from Tucker Carlson, who was given a room at the side. And it was just a remarkable scene. You know, there were a few hundred people in the ballroom, drinks, food, and sitting in the middle of it all was Donald Trump with Elon Musk next to him and people whooping and hollering, and Trump just sitting there eating an ice cream, completely nonchalant, as if, you know, well, whatever happens, happens. And that was remarkable. Then it was off to the convention centre for the Trump acceptance speech. About 2,000 of us crammed into a room, and boy, it was noisy. He came on stage with all of his family, with Melania's family, with the key people who'd supported the campaign and been part of it. And this is a small part of what he had to say.
I said that many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason. And that reason was to save our country and to restore America to greatness.
Well, in fact, it was a very long speech, but hey, he won, and as it looks at the moment on the projections, he's probably going to finish up with 312 Electoral College votes, and all he needed was 270 to win. So it isn't just a win, it's a very big win. And he's taken the Senate, and it looks like he'll take the lower house as well. This is a crushing, comprehensive victory for the Republicans over Kamala Harris and over the Democrats. But there's one figure in this that you probably haven't heard much about, but it was very, very interesting. He's a young man. He's 18 years old. His name is Barron Trump. Now, there's a picture of me with Barron Trump at Mar-a-Lago. As you can see, now, I haven't suddenly become a midget. Barron is 6'9", age 18. Now, it was a pleasure. I met him before when he was about 14, but he's 18 years old now. Incredibly polite, very well turned out, and remarkably smart. He told me more about my social media clips over the years than I can even remember. And he is credited with convincing his father that for this election, they should do podcasts. And that's what Trump did. Podcast after podcast after podcast. Many of those podcasts aimed at young voters, many of them aimed in many ways at young male voters. And, you know, I noticed on the night there were lots of boxers, lots of UFC fighters, a lot of alpha male stuff going on. And I think young Barron actually played quite a significant role in the victory of his father. But the question for us is Donald Trump's election good news for Britain? Now, I think it is, because he's instinctively pro British. I think it is because when he was president, he was more than happy to do a trade deal with us. The problem was our Conservative government hadn't got Brexit done. We weren't in a position to be able to do so. But given that Trump is saying 10% tariffs on anything that comes in from anywhere else in the world, that, I think, presents a big dilemma to Keir Starmer's government. There are other problems too. I suspect the handover of the Chagos Islands, casting long-term doubt over the naval base that the Americans use on Diego Garcia, I suspect that could become a problem. And not to mention some very disobliging things that have been said by very senior Labour politicians, including, of course, Sadiq Khan, who's now 10 years into an outright feud with Donald Trump. Well, let's talk to somebody who remembers when relationships between us and America were really at their very best. I'm going to talk to Peggy Grande, who was an executive assistant to Ronald Reagan. Peggy, when you were around working for Ronnie Reagan, I mean, relationships with this country simply couldn't have been better, could they?
Well, thank you, Nigel, for having me on. And yes, that special relationship was as special as it has ever been. But I'll say, even when politicians come and go, and even when we have different sides of the aisle that maybe agree or disagree, I think that the American people and the people in Great Britain continue to have that special affinity for each other. So I don't think that changes with politics. And I look forward to Donald Trump returning to the White House and re-engaging with that special relationship, not only on a personal, warm and friendly level, but on a trade level. And making America great will also help make the rest of the world strong and safe again.
OK, but one of Trump's key policies is big tariffs. Now, we understand the logic of the argument, big tariffs on China over cars, and perhaps a policy that helped to win him Michigan and Wisconsin and states like that. But do you think this administration will be open to a trade deal with the United Kingdom?
Absolutely. And you and I both know Donald Trump well. He was the author of The Art of the Deal. So we know that he says these things that give him room to negotiate. He's not going to show you his cards. He's not going to show you where he's going to wind up. He is going to go to what some may say is an extreme policy, but he's going to come back to common sense, and it gives him room to negotiate. And so I have great faith and trust in him to be the architect of the art of the deal, whether it's with the UK or other places globally, to do what's best for the American people, but also what is smart and common sense. He wants to have economic entanglement with countries all over the world that lead to greater relationships and respect. And so I expect that he will do that in his second term as he did the first time.
Interesting. Now, Peggy, you worked for Ronald Reagan. You've worked in the Trump White House. You are a lifelong Republican activist. Just how good does today feel?
It feels incredible. You know, not only have we given a mandate to Donald Trump to implement the policies that he has run on, but it's also been an utter rejection of the policies of the left. We have rejected both the message and the messenger of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And interestingly enough, we see Donald Trump leading the way and with a message of unity. He wants to usher in a golden age of America. And personally, I cannot wait to see that happen. I can't wait to be part of it. And we are very enthusiastic, not just as Republicans, but as the working class American population. 72 million of us have rejected the extremism of the left. We haven't listened to the lies. We have ignored the insults, the instructions, and the ignoring from the left. And we're going to return Donald Trump to the White House to make America great together, starting in January.
Peggy Grande, thank you very much indeed. Well, some joy there. I'm joined by George Eaton, senior online editor, New Statesman, and Ranulph Jayawardena, former Conservative Member of Parliament. George, America has said no to woke.
Well, I think it's said no to the incumbents who they saw as failing on the economy. I think that was the factor above all. You know, you can't go to the country with living standards lower for some or barely higher than they were 4 years ago. It's actually the Reagan question. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? The electorate answered no. I think that was the overriding factor. Obviously, there are cultural issues as well.
Yeah, no, there are. Ranulph, I mean, did you believe Trump could win like this?
Yes, I'd been saying to anyone who asked that I was pretty confident Trump was going to win. I think it's what is surprising is the scale of the win, including in the Senate as well.
Yeah.
So that scale is the thing that has surprised a lot of people. But now there is clarity in America, and as you've said in the past, he is an Anglophile, so there is an opportunity for the UK and the US to do some really exciting things together if the Labour government wants to take that opportunity.
Now, Peggy was very wise in talking about the art of the deal. Trump always asks for that and is prepared to settle for that, and that's been his business technique and his political technique. But we do face the prospect of tariffs. And that seems to me, George, to be rather interesting, because on the one hand, if the Labour government get over the insults, get over the 100 staffers that campaign there, and I guess in time we will get over these things. But if they start to negotiate on trade with America, Brussels won't like that. So where does Starmer go on this?
They will definitely want to avoid tariffs. I mean, the budget growth forecasts are already pretty anemic. So faced with the prospects of lower growth, higher inflation, they will want to avoid that. Now, we know Trump is a deal maker. Obviously, free trade agreement's been mooted for a long time. I think it'll be quite difficult to get that across the line. I think you'd have rows over American beef. There are already issues with divisions amongst farmers here with the government. I also think you'd have a row over private American companies and the NHS. But Trump's unpredictable. And we know Labour want to do, they say, original things to boost growth, and the US is the biggest trading partner.
Well, absolutely, and equally, of course, we're the biggest foreign investor in America and vice versa, so all of that makes sense. But what about Brussels? What about Brussels? What about if Brussels say to Keir Starmer, with whom he wants a closer relationship, no, you're not doing that?
Yeah, well, they're definitely not rejoining the customs union, so they are going to have freedom to strike these trade deals, unlike, as you say, the last time when we trapped in that transition period. It's going to be, on the one hand, I think you could see space for a close relationship with the US. The intelligence security relationship will always be there. But they'll have to make a call on foreign policy. Ukraine, obviously, is part of it, and a big call on defence spending.
Could Trump be good for the UK?
In some ways, though, he's unpredictable. I think that is what defines him. He's unpredictable. He's pragmatic. I think in some ways...
But it's interesting, you're from a centre-left publication, and you're not saying he's going to be awful.
No, I mean, look, I think he's unpredictable, and I certainly think Labour have to make that relationship as strong as possible, because they don't want to rejoin the EU. So actually, look, Atlanticism is such a key pole of Britain's foreign policy. They've got to make it work.
Randall, the Donald, good for us?
Fundamentally, he is an Anglophile, so yes, having someone in the White House who wants to do more with the UK must be a good thing. The challenge is, will the government rise to the occasion? And the trade deal, a lot of work was done before 2020, before he left last time, so that could be revisited very quickly in the next 18 months. There is a window. So over to Keir and to David Lammy to strike it.
Over to Keir and David Lammy. Yes, David, you've said a few horrible things about the Donald. There is work to be done. In a moment, let's discuss the extraordinary electoral coalition that was built by Trump, discuss whether it has possibilities for us here, and is Trump's win divisive for America, or could it actually be bringing America together? We'll be joined by one of the very few pollsters who predicted the result.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
I'm joined now by an acknowledged authority on Ludwig van Beethoven. He's already written 7 books on the subject, and next week his 8th is released. It's called In Search of Beethoven, and it stands apart as a deeply personal account of John Souché's relationship with the great composer as he follows his footsteps from Bonn to Vienna. Yes, I introduce author, journalist and classic FM presenter John Souché.
Hello, Mike.
It's delightful to have you here, and you have, as I say, written now 8 books on Beethoven. So the question is, why Beethoven?
Well, the word that is often used that I don't like is obsession, obsessive, because somehow there's something not quite right about that. The word that I use is passion. I have a passion for this man's life and music that began, I suppose, around 50 years ago, sometime in my early 20s. I can't remember the exact moment. He kind of crept up on me, and suddenly, as I was a journalist, TV journalist all my life, but before that I was a failed musician. I wanted to be a professional musician, but fortunately for the world of music, I realised I didn't have the talent. But this man's music crept up on me, and I knew from then that it would not go away, it would only increase, and that is what's happened. There are other composers I will listen to, minor names like Mozart, Wagner, Haydn, but Beethoven just does it for me. I was highly educated musically at school because I loved it, to the extent that I wanted to turn professional, but as I say, I didn't have the talent, but that has stayed with me. I read music, I understand music, as you say, I play the trombone, in those days to quite a high level.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
They catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, not many pollsters got it right. Everybody was saying it's going to be a dead heat. But before I come to that, some of your views from home about whether Trump is good for Britain. Laura says, we definitely won't be at the back of the queue now that we have the Donald back in the White House. Chris says, I haven't said it before. Thatcher, Reagan, Trump and Farage are the best politicians I've been lucky enough to see. Well, if that's as good as it gets, we've got problems. Craig says, will Keir Starmer be able to work with Donald Trump, or will the so-called special relationship suffer as Labour and the MAGA Republicans are so far apart politically? They are so far apart on virtually everything. You're absolutely right. And, you know, Trump takes the view that Starmer really is very left-wing. But they don't have to agree on everything for us to form a practical relationship, which is why I've said that if the Labour government want me to help in any way smooth bridges, I will do so. Why? Not because I support this government or its policies, but because it's in the national interest, and we should never lose sight of that. Now, James Johnson, co-founder of JL Partners and a regular on this show, I've got to tell you, his eve of poll prediction was Trump would win 287 Electoral College votes, Harris 251. Everybody else said it was going to be a tie. James joins me live now down the line. Well, James, in fact, it's even bigger than that. It looks like ending up at 312, doesn't it?
It does indeed. It's going to be 312 electoral votes. That was actually what our forecast said for 25 of the last 30 days before the election. There was a big dump of polls in the last couple of days that tightened that slightly, but it did mean we had the biggest Trump margin of any pollster.
Yeah, well, good for you. Congratulations. Now, I'll tell you what really fascinated me about the campaign. It was the two coalitions. Firstly, yes, of course, Trump was there, the figurehead of the whole campaign. I mean, the rallies. He did 4 rallies on the last day, 6 hours of speaking. I mean, on a human level, quite totally and utterly extraordinary. I saw him after the second rally. I mean, he looked fresh as a daisy. How he does it at 78, I do not know. But what was interesting to me, James, was when the public looked, the voters looked at the campaign, they didn't just see Donald Trump. They saw Robert Kennedy Jr. and Elon Musk. That was quite a broadening out for a man that's supposed to be a narcissist.
It absolutely was. And actually, one of the key moments of the campaign was when RFK Jr. endorsed Donald Trump. We saw that as a big moment where Trump's odds in our model soared upwards. It was around the time of the Kamala Harris DNC speech. Lots of the media were focused on that, but what we were seeing in the polls was that endorsement have an impact. And the coalition, Nigel, that you referenced there is really vast. The big shift, what we're seeing, is amongst younger, non-white men. That's the group that really swung to Trump in big numbers, maybe partly because of, Trump's campaigning on podcasts and so on, but mainly because of the issues. Fed up with the situation on the border, fed up with inflation, and actually feeling that the Democrats' values were getting further away from their own.
Yeah, and all the talk that he was Hitler and all this absolute stupidity that we saw in the last couple of weeks, and yet, the Hispanic vote, the shift in the Hispanic vote in the last 3 elections towards Trump and republicanism is remarkable, and an increase in black voters too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a small increase with black voters and a really quite significant shift with Hispanic voters. I spent the last few months in the swing states interviewing voters and spoke to Hispanic voters in Phoenix, Hispanic men. It was fascinating, Nigel. In the first 10 minutes of the conversation, they were saying, oh, I'm undecided or maybe leaning Harris. Once you spent 90 minutes with them and you got a sense of their worldview, they ended up saying they were voting for Donald Trump. There's still that sort of, stigma around backing Trump in those communities. But I'll give you one quote which really summed up, I think, why a lot of these voters went to Trump. It was a focus group on Wednesday evening before the election in Detroit. An Asian American, first immigrant to the US, and he was really frustrated about the border situation. Huge number of illegal immigrants coming over the border. He said to me, "I don't want to lose the country that I moved to." And you'll be more familiar than anyone else, Nigel, with the fact that West Midlands and Birmingham voted Leave in 2016 in our Brexit referendum. A lot of that was ethnic minority groups who felt like they came to the country in the right way, and others were not, or were getting benefits that they shouldn't have received. Same dynamic here.
Really, really fascinating. James, thank you for joining us, and congratulations on getting it absolutely bang on. Well done, you. So, George, it's your lot, isn't it? It's your lot. Constantly screaming that Trump's racist, Trump's divisive, Trump's bad for society. But actually, by bringing together all these different communities in the way that he is, perhaps actually he's becoming a unifying force.
I think his opponents have to try and understand more and condemn less at the moment, actually. I think unless Liberals learn from this defeat, they'll lose again. I think there were people who should have learned from the mistakes of the Clinton campaign in 2016 and the Brexit referendum here who didn't. That's partly why you then had 2019 in the UK and we've now had 2024. I think one of the lessons, I think the Democrats have a class problem. I think it's very interesting in terms of the Trump coalition. He's actually done better among lower middle income Americans than he did in 2016 this time. The Democrat vote rose amongst those earning over $100,000 who have maybe had a better time over the last 4 years, haven't felt that the hit from higher food prices, higher gas prices. They also need a positive offer to the country. I think Kamala Harris ran a vacuous campaign, struggled to say what she'd do differently from Joe Biden. And they also have to understand why Trump is broadening his appeal. There was actually a swing towards him among women, which goes completely against, obviously, the pre-election narrative that this was going to be an election defined by the right to choose and abortion. So they need to understand some of Trump's appeal if they want to avoid another defeat.
Well, thus far they've learnt nothing from what I could see of all the press guys. I mean, unbelievable. Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, saying it's going to be okay. Don't worry, if you're an immigrant, you're still safe. Just not getting it. Parallels with here, aren't there? That you're 100,000 plus white, middle class, middle income person that you'd have put down as conservative for the whole of your life suddenly might be Lib Dem or Labour, and the more working classes might be Reform, might be Conservative, certainly with Brexit. Parallels are remarkable.
Well, I think George is absolutely right. The really important thing, whatever anyone makes of Trump, whatever party they might be in here, the important thing is to learn. Learn how people decided to choose for a party perhaps they've never voted before. And that's because he campaigned on the issues that they cared about rather than what a very small political elite care about. And that's true here in Westminster as well. The Westminster sort of bubble continues even now. to focus on things that are entirely irrelevant to the man on the street across the country, whether that's in Hampshire or in Humberside. The issues facing people across the country are focused on things like the economy and making sure that their families have good health care, that their children get a good education. They're not interested in whether there are 72 different sorts of genders and so on. No. But those are the things that people focus on here in Westminster. So the opportunity is to learn from this.
Yeah, I think you're right. Pronouns are out in Trump's America, is how it would look to me. In a moment, let's talk about something that could cause a row between us and the Americans, and it is the government's decision voluntarily to surrender the sovereignty of the Chagos Islands. I've been talking a lot about the potential military implications of this, but what about the Chagosians? What about the people? Were they anything in terms of the negotiations, the decisions that were taken by David Lammy, or are they once again getting a truly rotten deal of which we should be ashamed?
Hello again and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It stays gloomy for most of us over the next 24 hours, very little change, a lot of low cloud mist, fog, some drizzle, but also some cloud breaks. We've seen those across West Wales, North Devon, northern Scotland, northern England during the day, and they'll continue in a number of these locations overnight, most especially northern Scotland. And where we do see these clear spells, temperatures will fall away, so you wouldn't rule out a touch of frost, a few fog patches, say, for the Highland Glens. But otherwise, we keep the cloud cover and we keep the mild air. 8 to 12 Celsius first thing, but it is a grey start for most of us with that extensive low cloud covering the hills in the west and giving some outbreaks of drizzle, particularly for the Outer Hebrides. Some more persistent rain here, a fresh breeze. Northern Scotland, though, the mainland at least, seeing plenty of blue skies first thing. Come further south into the Highlands and Grampians, covered by cloud, a lot of hill fog. Northern Ireland, some drizzle first thing. Likewise for Wales and the southwest. Generally dry for central and southeastern England, but overcast skies remaining and very little change through the day. So the weather you start the day with is likely to be the kind of weather you end the day with. The drizzle will come and go in the west, but it's likely to be a bit more persistent in some places compared with recent days. There are outbreaks of rain gathering to the west to arrive in for the weekend. Brightest skies, like I say, northern Scotland, highest temperatures here, mid-teens, otherwise a little bit cooler compared with Thursday. Now, Saturday begins with cloudy skies for most of us. We'll see a bit more rain arriving into the west, and during Saturday and into Sunday, we'll see these bands of rain move through, but on the positive side, they will clear the air so that by the start of next week, we'll see much more sunshine.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, Mauritius had been part of us. Yes, we had been the coloniser since 1814, since we fought off the Napoleonic French. But in 1968, Mauritius went for independence. But the Chagos Islands stayed with us. But the Chagosians ultimately were forced to leave their homeland. They went to Mauritius. They had a pretty unhappy, unpleasant time in Mauritius. And they finished up here. There's even a colony of 3,500 of them living just outside Crawley. So these people have had just the most rotten deal over the course of now nearly 60 years. But where do they come in to this decision? Well, I'm going to speak to Jean-Francois Nellan, who is the spokesman for Chagosian Voices, and he joins me down the line from Derby. And Jean-Francois, very pleased to have you on the programme again. Did the Foreign Secretary, did he at any point negotiate with your community?
Unfortunately not. Again, the voice of Chagosian is not well represented in books and journals. Chagosian has not been consulted at any stage of the political or even legal journey, including removal from the island, transfer to Mauritius and the Seychelles, or by the International Court of Justice and by the United Nations. The attendance of or participation of a handful of Chagosian at public event and hearing has been treated as if we were represented by all Chagosian. And the last couple meeting which the foreign minister did last month, they specifically said they won't be talking about negotiation. And that was on the 30th of September. And 6 days later, Minister Doughty announced that they are going to give away the island to Mauritius without our consent.
Would you like, I mean, given that Diego Garcia is the military base, would you like to go back to the islands and settle somewhere else?
Well, majority people would like to go back. And they say they are not against the military base.
Okay.
They have made it clear, and they know that military base and they can cohabitate with it. And yes, they would like to go back under British protection, like they have been said.
Would you not go back if it's owned by Mauritius?
Mauritius does not recognize the Chagosian. We have been treated like unfairly in Mauritius, and they're still denying our right. So how can we go back under Mauritian sovereignty?
Yeah, you're in a difficult position. Well, look, I have to say, I express this not just on behalf of myself, but I think on behalf of all decent people, that ever since 1968, your community has been treated abominably, and it continues to be treated that way. And we are going to make sure on this channel, I promise you, that your voice gets heard, because for you to be ignored in all of this is a disgrace. Thank you for joining me.
And this is what the community is asking. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I get it. Thank you. Thank you. Something really interesting there, George, that he says, we as Chagosians do not object to the base. We just want to go back to our homelands, and there are a series of islands that can be settled. The island number 2 is actually quite sizable, but we want to do it under the Brits because of the way. So even though we didn't treat them very well, it looks like the Mauritians treated them even worse, if you believe their side of the story. We've also got a Trump administration, and I'd be very surprised. I mean, this is, by the way, Chagos Islands is not top of Donald Trump's intro right at the moment.
Ukraine is, yeah.
But, of course.
Yeah.
But when we get a Secretary of State, when we get a Defense Secretary in Washington, this will be somewhere in their in tray. And I, having spoken to people very close to Trump, they are deeply worried about whether a 99-year-old leasehold deal can work, given that the 50-year one with Hong Kong has frankly been shredded. I mean, there's no other way of putting it. Hasn't David Lammy got this wrong?
Well, look, no one listening to Jean-Francois would say that there aren't questions for the government to answer here. And I think you're right that a new administration raises questions over the deal. The British government were very pleased with the 99-year lease for the US-UK base. They saw that as a diplomatic success. There were some reports that the Americans weren't happy with it. Actually, my sense is that the Biden administration was on board with this. But if there are people in Trump world who are already questioning this before he's even entered the Oval Office, then I think you wouldn't be surprised if the Americans do review it.
Well, I asked this question in the House of Commons. I asked David Lammy. So you've done this. What if, on November the 5th, there's a different decision? I can't see any upside for us in doing this.
Absolutely not. I mean, it was a totally unforced error here from the government. One of their first decisions is an absolutely terrible one. And this 99-year lease is a total smokescreen. It covers up the fact that it leaves open all of the other islands now to be built on by China.
Yep.
Exactly right. Yep. You know, the people, the Chagos have been treated poorly. I've heard some of those stories myself when I was on the Foreign Affairs Committee in Parliament. And, you know, they will not trust anyone other than the British to protect their rights. So there is an opportunity now for Keir Starmer and for David Lammy to change their mind. You know, Britain is a sovereign country. The Parliament hasn't ratified or Parliament hasn't scrutinised.
Well, mercifully, mercifully, we did get the promise from Lammy that there would be a bill before Parliament.
So it's not has scrutinised that yet. So there's the opportunity for him to change his mind. And if they want to use Donald Trump as the excuse, then so be it. Let them use that as the opportunity to revisit this and come up with a better decision. To continue the British sovereignty over the islands as a British overseas territory, but allowing perhaps the Chagosians to resettle if they wish under British protection on another island seems an entirely sensible compromise.
Strikes me as being a win all round. Yeah. And not in the manifesto, George, either.
No, that's true. Big foreign policy decisions often aren't. You have to deal with the world as it is.
But nothing had changed.
No, that's true.
I mean, nothing had changed. I mean, I get it. You know, you win an election and there's an invasion somewhere or whatever. But they've got this wrong, haven't they?
Well, let's see how this fares when it's scrutinised in Parliament.
Well, I think we've done a fair bit of scrutiny in the last 10 minutes, I have to tell you. Now, what the Farage moment. The Guardian newspaper have offered staff therapy over the Trump win because some of them, the poor darlings, are in such an awful state. And you may have seen a statement that came out from Sadiq Khan telling Londoners, it's going to be OK. The sky won't fall in. It's just astonishing. You know, democracy, it seems, for quite large groups on the left, is only suitable when they get the result that they want. And my last What the Farage of the day is the London Assembly have voted in favour of calling for the Mayor, Sadiq Khan, to help asylum seekers cover public transport costs. The only member to oppose the motion was Reform's Alex Wilson, with the Tories abstaining, and that's a completely accurate news report. So let's just work this out, George. Bus fares are going up from £2 to £3, but if you enter Britain illegally, it's free.
Labour have got a problem on this policy, I think, because it's low-income voters who rely on buses more than trains. So I think.
And your lot, gutless, useless, spineless Tories, as they always are, abstained.
Well, I obviously haven't seen this meeting, but I think again
I just told you about it.
Again, this sums up what's wrong with so many people in the bubble. What people are more concerned about in London is the low traffic neighbourhoods, the 20-mile-per-hour enforced speed limits that are killing this city and destroying the economic growth that the city needs. And of course, Labour centrally have been reducing the number of homes that are going to be built here as well. Those are the things that people care about.
The bigger point is good, decent folk who work and pay their taxes and obey the law think, if I'm a natural-born Brit, I'm treated one way. If I come to Britain illegally and claim asylum, I'm treated another. I've had enough of living in two-tier Britain. It's a fair point.
Yeah.
There we are. Left and right agree. It's a fair point. Let's see what Sadiq Khan does. I think we know the answer already. In a moment, let's talk net zero. Let's talk what's going to happen to our electricity supply. Let's talk whether we're all going to have to turn, actually, a lot more of our lights off at peak times. Otherwise, we won't meet the targets of zero carbon electricity by 2030, something to which we're all supposed to bow down.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Millions are struggling to stay warm with the wet weather, the cost of living and, of course, cuts to fuel payments.
Yes, winter is fast approaching, so it's crucial to find cost-effective ways to save on your energy expenses while staying reasonably warm.
So joining us to provide advice on heating your home, or at least staying warm somehow, is one of the leading voices on lowering energy bills, Nick Miles. And you are very welcome in here this morning. I mean, a lot of people would say, well, in the olden days, you just used to put on an extra jumper. But actually, it's more serious than that, isn't it? What is the best way, the most cost-effective way to keep your home warm?
Some of the bigger things is we need to do more things on insulating our properties, but actually sometimes, it can be simple things like turning down a thermostat. Those that have got the luxury of being able to afford energy bills and keep their homes on the thermostat a bit too high, if you just turn it down by one simple degree, as long as you keep it between 18 and 22 degrees, can save up to 5 to 10% of your energy bill. So that's a kind of a very simple way of doing things, but, it can be other little tips and tricks you can do as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I always get it when people say about this, but like 18 degrees is not warm for a house.
No, and it's twofold actually. It's that kind of relative temperature, but also it's the kind of drafts and things you have in your house. So it's the comfort factor. So what we have a lot of old properties in our country. You've got some 8 million hard-to-treat properties built before World War II that have got poor insulation, but also very, very drafty. So it's the temperature and it's the kind of the draftiness of them that kind of keeps us uncomfortable.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss My Big Opinion, Mark Meets, and My Take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Under the bridge. Well, we're back to our old friend Ed Miliband. Don't know whether you've noticed, but a lot of very, very calm weather at the moment, hence the large number of channel crossings. A report out from the National Energy System Operator making very, very clear that when it comes to the plan for zero carbon electricity by 2030, the one thing we will need is gas. Even though gas at the moment is only 5% of our supply, there are days when the wind doesn't blow, when it's up to 50%. And there is a massive problem here, as explained to us by Clive Moffat, energy expert, a few weeks ago, which is most of our gas plants are coming towards the end of their lives. Add to that another report out saying that the only possible way we can get there is if we start using less electricity. When they start to use demand pricing even more than they do now, well, you simply can't afford to put the lights on of an evening. And I'm going to argue that all of this is for the birds, because we're actually not going to make the targets anyway. Our electricity bills are already, for our manufacturers, the most expensive in the world. And George, I completely understand there are, a majority of the country who are worried about the environment. A vast majority of the under 40s, really think global warming is a dreadful problem. But what Miliband's trying to do, it can't be done, and it's doing too much damage.
So I think on this, it's interesting. So he lifted the ban on onshore wind. A lot of people thought that was sensible. He's investing in offshore wind. A lot of that at the moment, we have a lot of offshore wind capacity. A lot of that's owned by foreign state companies from Scandinavia. So I think the argument, well, actually, why don't we have some of that for ourselves, is coherent. I think here's the challenge for Labour. During the election, you'll remember, Keir Starmer, Miliband said, we'll reduce bills by £300.
I know.
The £300 figure has gone now. And this feeds into the broader living standards challenge. At the moment, and this relates to the US election too, at the moment, living standards, if you look at the forecast, is set to be the second worst performance in recent history. if people's energy bills are significantly higher at the time of the next election, that's going to be a real political headache. So I think that's how the average person will experience the energy transition. Am I paying more for energy or am I paying less?
Well,
I think Labour are in a tough position if they're paying more.
I can assure you, looking at the strike prices that have been done for the new offshore and onshore wind projects, I think electricity prices will be a lot higher in a few years. Ranul, it was your lot that started it, obviously. You know, with net zero, the rush to net zero, the changing of targets, it all happened right at the end of Theresa May's time. It's not achievable.
Well, you know, looking after the environment and generating electricity or energy more generally need not be mutually exclusive. And the problem here is really, I mean, the idea that we've got to have demand pricing is a cover for the fact that we don't produce enough energy today. We produce far less electricity per capita than any other European country or any other major European country. And that's because successive governments, I accept, the coalition delayed it, and now the Labour government have delayed it again. Nuclear power has not been brought on stream quick enough. That is a way that we can do both. And, you know, offshore wind's great. I actually am entirely comfortable with that. But the idea that...
What happens when you get a week like this, when the wind doesn't blow?
Well, this is my point. This is exactly my point. Offshore wind's great. I'm comfortable with that. But you've got to have a mix. And nuclear is an important part of that mix that no one has really wanted to wrestle with.
But nuclear's a waste if you put it together with wind. Why? Because wind's intermittent and nuclear gives base load. If you're using nuclear to back up wind, that makes no sense at all.
Nuclear provides the base load. Gas and wind are...
Right. So we still need gas. So why are the government putting no new reinvestment into gas plants? That is the question that Miliband needs to answer.
Well, and gas storage. And, you know, and I think, you know, gas, net zero, it tells us a story. It's net. We're not saying there will be zero emissions ever. No one's ever said that. It's about making sure that we've got the right balance. And gas will be an important part of the mix for the foreseeable future.
Well, actually, Ed Miliband's ambitions are not even net, a zero carbon electricity system. And I'm putting it... See, I think this policy is going to do Labour more damage even than the numbers crossing the English Channel. I think that promise, and George is on it already, that promise of cutting bills by £300 when probably they're going to go up a lot is going to cause huge, huge harm. What is the Conservative Party position on net zero now?
I don't know, because Kemi is obviously revisiting policy from first principles, and I think that's a very healthy place to be. You know, she's come in now, she's set out that she wants to begin afresh, and she will be listening to the best experts. And, you know, with this sort of policy, many experts are saying for economic growth and for businesses, we will be hiding emissions because people will go off-grid, burn more diesel privately, and undermine the target that's being set by the current government. These are the sorts of factors that need to be looked at as part of the Conservative Party's policy in the months ahead.
Let's finish up on Kemi. Let's finish up on the new shadow cabinet. And George, I've been giving you a very tough time as a Labour supporter during this programme.
Oh, I'm not a Labour supporter.
Well, you're on that side of the argument. What do you make of the new shadow cabinet put together by Kemi Badenoch?
Well, she's gone for a unity strategy, hasn't she? Mel Stride as Shadow Chancellor, I think that was probably the most important appointment. He's more associated with the One Nation wing of the party. Robert Jenrick as Shadow Justice Secretary is going to be interesting. He wants to leave the ECHR.
But he can't.
She hasn't pledged that.
But he can't now, can he?
Well, not under her.
No, exactly. I mean, he's taken a job, but he's now going to have to argue against the position that he took running as a leader.
I think Labour are going to have fun with that.
Well, in fairness, I don't think Kemi's actually ruled it out. I think Kemi said that she would look at it, and this is the point, that no policy has been set at this moment in time because she wants to go back to first principles.
She was pretty clear in her leadership campaign where she stood on it.
Well, I think on the GB News hustings with Christopher Hope, she actually said she would look at it and she wouldn't rule anything in or out. So I think Rob Jenrick still has the opportunity to work with the team and to devise the right policy to stop the votes.
We're mentioning Robert Jenrick, who now is almost a household name. Most of the rest of the shadow cabinet, I mean, no one's ever heard of them. They are the most nondescript bunch I've ever seen.
Well, Priti Patel becoming the Shadow Foreign Secretary, I think is very good news.
Keep going.
I think you've got Laura Trott now as Shadow Environment Secretary.
Yes, absolutely.
She was very involved with the...
The big beasts are all on the back benches.
She was very involved with the last election campaign. You're right, a lot of people have chosen this moment in time to spend more time with their families, as they would say. And, you know, fair enough. It has been, for some of these people, 14 years of service to this country in government, and they've decided that for their families it's the right time to take a little breather. But, you know, the shadow cabinet that has been formed today might well not be the shadow cabinet that goes into the next election.
Well, no, and indeed the leader may not be there in 18 months either, given the record of the last few years. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining me on the programme. Jacob.
Evening, how nice to see you back. Congratulations.
Yes. Well, I thought I might have to stay longer because it might take a few days to get a result. But hey, he won it, and he won it big.
He won on everything, and they've done well in the other elections too. No, it's been a great success for people who actually care about their voters and listen to their voters. And you were talking about this net zero nonsense, which is not something the Americans are going to put up with. They want cheap energy and their economy grows. And we have expensive energy and our economy is not growing.
And the evidence is there.
And the evidence is there.
Is it Trump tonight for you?
We're going to be talking a bit about Trump, of course. Also, Starmer making the wrong choice. So what's the first thing he does? He goes off to make a closer arrangement with the EU. But the EU is failing. All the governments in the EU are unpopular, out of touch with their electorates. They're all Kamala Harris rather than Donald Trump.
But there you are. All of that coming up after the news. First, though, let's get the all-important weather.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It stays gloomy for most of us over the next 24 hours, very little change. A lot of low cloud mist, fog, some drizzle, but also some cloud breaks. We've seen those across West Wales, North Devon, northern Scotland, northern England during the day, and they'll continue in a number of these locations overnight, most especially northern Scotland. And where we do see these clear spells, temperatures will fall away, so you wouldn't rule out a touch of frost. A few fog patches, say, for the Highland Glens. But otherwise, we keep the cloud cover and we keep the mild air. 8 to 12 Celsius first thing, but it is a grey start for most of us with that extensive low cloud covering the hills in the west and giving some outbreaks of drizzle, particularly for the Outer Hebrides. Some more persistent rain here, a fresh breeze. Northern Scotland, though, the mainland at least, seeing plenty of blue skies first thing. Come further south into the Highlands and Grampians, covered by cloud, a lot of hill fog. Northern Ireland, some drizzle first thing. Likewise for Wales and the southwest. Generally dry for central and southeastern England, but overcast skies remaining and very little change through the day. So the weather you start the day with is likely to be the kind of weather you end the day with. The drizzle will come and go in the west, but it's likely to be a bit more persistent in some places compared with recent days. There are outbreaks of rain gathering to the west to arrive in